A few hours ago, Anthropic released a model at half the price of its own flagship, and on Anthropic's own coding benchmark, the cheaper one wins 43.3% against 33.7%. That is Claude Opus 5, beating Claude Fable 5. Here is what should stop you. Opus 5 costs the same as the model it replaces, $5 per million input tokens. This is not a discount. It is a repricing of the entire tier, and Anthropic deliberately made this model worse at one specific thing. That choice, not the benchmark, is the real story, and it changes what the intelligence you use every day costs. Start with what shipped. Opus 5 went live the same day across Claude, the Claude API, Claude Code, and Claude Cowork. $5 per million tokens in, 25 out, identical to Opus 4.8, and half of Fable 5's 10 and 50. It is the new default on Claude Max, the strongest model on Claude Pro, and there is a faster mode at double the price. The headline number is Frontier Bench, Anthropic's own coding evaluation. Opus 5, 43.3%. Fable 5, 33.7%. Opus 4.8, 18.7%. So the new model roughly doubles the one it replaces. These are vendor numbers on a vendor benchmark. And the customer results point the same way. Zapier ran Opus 5 through their automation benchmark. Their chief executive, Wade Foster, said it topped the leaderboard with a 100% pass rate on churn prevention workflow tasks and, in his words, without spending more tokens than prior Claude models. Remember that name. We come back to what that number actually means for a working team. The rest of the launch numbers keep the same shape. On ARC, AGI 3, 30.2%, roughly 3 times the next best model. On Cursor Bench 3.2, within 0.5% of Fable 5 at half the cost. On OS World 2.0, it passes Fable 5 at 1/3 of the cost. Flagship class results, at a lower tier's price, every time. So here is the question worth asking. Why would a lab ship a model that beats its own flagship and then charge half as much for it? Companies do not usually price their best work below their second best. The answer is in what Anthropic took out of this model, and they were unusually open about taking it out. Opus 5 is deliberately not at the frontier on dual-use cyber work. It finds vulnerabilities about as well as Mythos 5, but on exploit development it sits substantially behind. Anthropic states plainly that this model does not advance the dual-use biology or cybersecurity frontiers. That is not a gap they are apologizing for. It is a specification they ship to. And the enforcement is live in the product. Classifiers block binary-based scanning, penetration testing, and exploit generation. They are about 85% less restrictive than Fable 5's, but they are still on. A flagged request does not simply fail. By default, it falls back to Opus 4.8, server-side. There is also a cyber verification program for enterprises and researchers who genuinely need the capped capabilities. And the alignment side moved the other way. On Anthropic's automated behavioral audit, Opus 5 scored 2.30, the best score of any recent Claude, ahead of Opus 4.8, Mythos 5, and Sonnet 5. Lower is better here. It also showed the lowest rates of deceptive behavior and was the least susceptible to misuse of the group. Now back to Wade Foster, because that Zapier result is the most concrete thing in this launch. Zapier does not publish the task list, so take the general shape. Churn prevention at most companies is not a benchmark puzzle. It is a working process spread across account data and several tools, and it is exactly the kind of work teams have been slow to hand over. Opus 5 passed 100% of the churn prevention tasks. Across Zapier's automation benchmark, it delivered roughly 1.5 times the pass rate at the same cost as earlier models. The operational read, if that holds outside the benchmark, work that used to need a person checking every step could run further before that person is needed. That would be a staffing change, not a benchmark change. Which brings us to the thesis of this episode. Intelligence and dangerous capability used to move together. A smarter model was a more dangerous model. Anthropic has just shipped a model where they were dialed separately. Smart is one knob, dangerous is another, and the price of the model now tracks the risk it carries, rather than how clever it is. That is a product decision as much as a research result. So what does this do to your job? Start with the honest part. because I am not going to talk you out of it. Near-frontier intelligence, at half price, is precisely the cost curve people are worried about. Every time capable work gets cheaper, the question of who is still needed to do it gets louder. That worry is rational, and pretending otherwise would waste your time. Now the part that gets much less attention. By Anthropic's measure, Opus 5 spends about 60% less reasoning time than Opus 4.8. One trading firm reported roughly 1/7 the reasoning tokens with lower latency. That is not only a price cut, it is a speed change. The tools you already drive get cheaper and faster underneath you, without you changing a line. Put the two price sheets side by side. Fable 5, $10 per million tokens in, 50 out. Opus 5, 5 in, 25 out. For a team running the flagship tier on daily professional work, the same token volume now costs half as much, and the saving lands hardest on output tokens, which is where agent workloads tend to spend. Here is the flip side. When the model gets cheaper and faster, the scarce thing stops being tokens and starts being judgment, knowing what to ask for, what to reject, and when the answer is confidently wrong. Leverage moves toward the people who direct the work. That is a genuinely different skill from the one that was scarce 2 years ago. Now the part no same-day reaction video will give you: what actually changes when you migrate. And here's the framing that matters most. Moving to Opus 5 is no longer a string swap in your model identifier. It is a behavioral migration. The model behaves differently by default, and some of the prompts you already wrote are now working against you. First, which model for which job? And Anthropic draws this line themselves. Opus 5 is positioned for daily professional work. Fable 5 remains their recommendation for the longest autonomous runs. So the flagship did not become pointless overnight. It became specialized. Worth noting as well, Opus 5 carries no special data retention requirement, where Fable 5 has a 30-day rule. Then the prompt level surprises. Opus 5 verifies its own work, so the double-check your work instructions you carefully added now cause over-verification, and Anthropic's own guidance is to delete them. It also delegates to sub-agents far more eagerly than Opus 4.8, which is the reverse of the old failure mode, so your harness may need an explicit cap. And a new beta reroutes refused requests by category. Then the quiet ones, which cost money rather than quality. Thinking is now on by default. Leaving the parameter out used to mean no thinking, and now it means adaptive thinking, sharing one token budget with your answer. Turning thinking off is only allowed at high effort or below. The prompt cache minimum halved to 512 tokens. And Opus 5 draws from its own rate limit bucket, separate from the Opus 4 pool. 3 takeaways. 1. Capability and risk are now separate product aisles. A lab can ship more intelligence and less dangerous capability in the same release, and charge for each on its own terms. Expect every frontier lab to segment this way, and expect that segmentation to show up on a pricing page before it shows up in any announcement. 2. The price of near-frontier intelligence just halved overnight, on the same day that capability went up. If you are building a business case that depends on today's token price, build it assuming that price keeps halving. The workloads that look too expensive to run right now are the ones worth prototyping against today. 3, and this is the one that will cost you if you miss it. Your prompts encode assumptions about how a model behaves, that it will not verify itself, that it will not delegate, that thinking is off unless you ask. Opus 5 breaks all 3. Migration now means deleting instructions, not just adding them. Go and read your system prompt for what you no longer need to say. If this was useful, subscribe.